Ivan Osipov, a simple serf belonging to the Golitsyn princes, made a daring escape in his youth, barely 16 years old. Thus, in the mid-18th century, Vanka Kain emerged onto Moscow's criminal scene, a name that quickly echoed throughout the empire. From an unknown fugitive, he transformed into the most famous and dangerous thief in the golden-domed city, gathering a gang that terrorized merchants and ordinary citizens. His elusiveness, cunning, and boundless audacity gave rise to countless legends, and Moscow itself seemed to become his personal domain, where he robbed, extorted, and defrauded with impunity. But then the story takes a dizzying turn. Vanka Kain, whose name was synonymous with banditry, suddenly offered his services to the Detective Bureau, the main law enforcement agency responsible for apprehending criminals. And astonishingly, his offer was accepted. From the most wanted bandit, he instantly transformed into the chief, a so-called secret agent, a detective who was supposed to apprehend his own kind. The empire gained not a repentant sinner, but rather a wolf in sheep's clothing. Kain used his new position to eliminate rivals, blackmail former associates, and continue his illicit activities, all under the guise of public service. Popular lore, always fond of colorful characters, quickly created the image of a Russian Robin Hood from him, a noble bandit who robbed the rich and helped the poor. But this was merely a beautiful myth. Vanka Kain was no fairy tale hero. He was a calculating, ruthless predator who masterfully juggled roles, transforming the justice system into a tool for personal enrichment and power. He didn't fight for justice, he fought to stay afloat, utilizing every opportunity, every mask. This story of Vanka Kain is more than a mere chronicle of crimes. It is the anatomy of a soul warped by its era, a snapshot of a world where human life was worthless and one's future was predetermined from birth. Ivan Osipov was born into a system that denied him the right to freedom, choice, or dignity. He was property, a chattel, a rightless cog in the vast machinery of serfdom. From the age of 16, when he decided to escape, he already bore deep trauma, the trauma of inhumane subjugation, deprivation of will, and humiliation. This act of desperation, this flight, was not a romantic impulse. It was a leap into the unknown, from one abyss to another, where not freedom awaited him, but merely another form of the struggle for survival. Mid-18th century Moscow, where the young fugitive arrived, proved to be not a salvation, but a brutal school. It was a city of contrasts, where luxury coexisted with destitution, and law often yielded to lawlessness. Here, in the labyrinth of dirty alleys and backstreets, among the dregs of society and corrupt officials, Ivan Osipov learned the true cost of human life and power. He observed how the rich plundered the poor and how law enforcement officers themselves participated in criminal schemes. This environment left no room for the development of virtues. It demanded survival at any cost, shaping a pragmatic, cynical worldview. Kain quickly absorbed the main lesson: power in this reality lay not in morality, but in the ability to subjugate, deceive, and exploit. His sharp mind, which could have been used for creation, was twisted and honed for the needs of the criminal underworld. Every humiliation, every injustice he endured, every act of cruelty he witnessed ignited sparks of hatred and contempt for social order within his soul. The point of no return wasn't a single event, but a series of decisions, where each step towards lawlessness reinforced his conviction of his own righteousness and invulnerability. He saw no point in resisting a system that was itself permeated with decay. He saw an opportunity to use this decay to his advantage. The transformation from a fugitive serf to a hardened criminal and then to a secret agent was a logical progression of his path. It wasn't a metamorphosis, but rather the continuous evolution of a predator, mastering new, more sophisticated hunting methods. Vanka Kain sought neither redemption nor justice. He sought power, control, and absolute security, which he mistakenly believed could only be achieved by playing by his own rules within an alien yet remarkably pliable system. His story is a dark mirror of that era, reflecting not only the personality of one criminal, but also the deep flaws in the society that created and ultimately exploited him. In the mid-18th century, the Russian Empire was a colossal yet highly unstable mechanism. After the death of Peter the Great, the country experienced a period of palace coups, with rulers frequently succeeding each other on the throne, often lacking sufficient legitimacy or real power. Empress Elizabeth Petrovna, who came to power through another conspiracy, focused on the splendor of the court and foreign policy, leaving internal affairs to the mercy of a corrupt and inefficient bureaucracy. The central authority, preoccupied with its own survival and the struggle against intrigues, had neither the strength nor the desire to deeply delve into the everyday problems of millions of subjects. This weakness at the very top cascaded downwards, permeating all state institutions. This was particularly acutely felt within the justice and law enforcement systems. The Detective Bureau, intended to ensure security and apprehend criminals, was itself a hotbed of bribery and nepotism. Its employees, often incompetent and corrupt, preferred to extort money from the innocent rather than risk confronting real criminals. Justice became a commodity, accessible only to those who could buy it, while for the majority of the population it remained a mere formality or a tool of oppression. Against this backdrop, serfdom flourished, the foundation of the empire's economic and social system. Millions of peasants were virtually slaves, deprived of any rights, tied to the land and their masters. Desperate escapes by serfs like Ivan Osipov became a widespread phenomenon, swelling the ranks of vagrants, beggars, and, of course, criminals. These individuals, cast adrift from conventional society, formed a vast criminal underclass where survival depended on cunning, cruelty, and a lack of moral principles. Moscow, where crowds of these disenfranchised people flocked, was not only the capital, but also a colossal cauldron of social contradictions. Here, alongside the luxurious palaces of the nobility and wealthy merchant shops, slums huddled, where hunger, disease, and lawlessness reigned. The city operated by its own unwritten rules, where power was often determined not by law, but by the ability to intimidate and manipulate. The economy, based on primitive agricultural production and underdeveloped industry, could not provide work and sustenance for everyone, pushing many towards a life of crime. This entire environment, political instability, pervasive corruption, extreme social inequality, and an ineffective law enforcement system, created an ideal breeding ground for figures like Vanka Kain. His phenomenal success was not merely a result of personal audacity, but a direct consequence of deep systemic flaws that corroded the empire from within, enabling the most absurd and cynical schemes. Mid-18th century Moscow was not just a city for Vanka Kain, but a colossal stage where he masterfully performed his criminal plays. His wit, audacity, and a profound understanding of human weaknesses and systemic flaws allowed him to pull off operations that astounded his contemporaries with their brazenness and ingenuity. One of his favorite ploys, showcasing his cynical genius, was the so-called tax inspection. Vanka, or one of his closest associates, would don an official's uniform, sometimes even with fake but convincing documents, and appear unexpectedly at the shop of a wealthy merchant. Under the pretext of an unscheduled financial audit, he would begin to find fabricated violations, threatening enormous fines or even property confiscation. Terrified merchants, accustomed to pervasive corruption and unwilling to deal with the actual state apparatus, preferred to pay him off. Kain cleverly named a sum that seemed exorbitant but was still less than the declared fine, and received it in cash, disappearing as suddenly as he appeared. Such inspections brought the gang a stable and very substantial income, while simultaneously solidifying Kain's reputation as a man capable of anything. Another, even more sophisticated scheme that cemented his reputation as the king of Moscow's thieves was his ability to manipulate the criminal hierarchy itself. Vanka Kain didn't just rob, he built his own shadow empire, eliminating rivals by proxy. For instance, he could incite his accomplices, disguised as rival thieves, to raid a smaller gang. Then, appearing just in time as a protector or arbitrator, he would offer his services to resolve the conflict. Naturally, this was for a substantial fee or a share of future profits. In this way, he not only got rid of competitors, but also brought new territories or groups of criminals under his control, expanding his influence and collecting tribute from anyone wishing to operate within his domain. He frequently used information obtained from his numerous informants to blackmail not only merchants, but also other criminal kingpins, and at times even lower-level officials who were themselves involved in illicit schemes. His network was all-encompassing, and his methods ruthless. These operations, honed to perfection, demonstrated not only his personal audacity, but also a profound understanding of social structures and psychology. Vanka Kain skillfully played on people's fears and weaknesses, on their readiness to pay for ephemeral security in a world where law did not function. He didn't just steal money, he stole trust, dismantling the last vestiges of order, demonstrating that power, even criminal power, could be far more effective than state authority. His name became synonymous not just with criminality, but with total impunity and permissiveness, a symbol of how far one could go if the system itself provided all the opportunities. Behind the mask of a daring robber and cynical agent lay not just a criminal, but a masterful psychologist, capable of reading people like an open book. He intuitively sensed vulnerabilities, the fear of authority, the panic-inducing fear of ruin, the ineradicable greed that pushed people into risky deals. His famous tax inspections were not mere robberies but carefully staged performances, where Kain, clad in a uniform, played the role of an incorruptible yet formidable official. He didn't just demand money, he offered a profitable solution to a problem he himself had created. Merchants, accustomed to pervasive corruption, saw in this not a bandit, but an opportunity to resolve the issue by paying a sum that seemed mercifully smaller than the declared fine. Kain did not act alone. His phenomenal success was also due to his masterful construction of his shadow network. He surrounded himself not just with thugs, but with individuals possessing specialized skills, from counterfeiters and burglars to charismatic negotiators, and most importantly, informants deeply embedded within state structures. These experts bribed officials, compromised guards, disillusioned scribes, were his eyes and ears, supplying information about valuable cargo routes, the state of affairs in wealthy homes, and impending police raids. He didn't just pay them, he created a system of mutual dependence where everyone felt part of something large and elusive and at times indispensable. Vanka Kain understood the power of rumors and myths. He not only allowed, but actively encouraged the spread of legends about himself, about his elusiveness, about how he robbed the rich, even if this was merely a cover for his true, selfish goals. This aura of a folk hero not only provided him with tacit support among the lower classes, but also created an aura of mystical power that demoralized opponents and made ordinary people both fear and admire him. The buzz around his name was his weapon, paralyzing will and weakening resistance. But his main tool, without a doubt, was his phenomenal ability to adapt. Kain was a chameleon, changing not only his appearance, but the very essence of his behavior depending on the situation. He could be a ruthless bandit, a charming conversationalist, a stern official, or even a pious parishioner. He instantly read social codes, speech patterns, and gestures characteristic of different social strata, from noble to commoner, from merchant to detective. This unique flexibility allowed him to infiltrate any circles, gain trust, and then ruthlessly exploit it. His transition from chief criminal to chief secret agent was not an act of repentance, but the ultimate display of this adaptability, a new, even more sophisticated means of survival and dominance in a world where rules were dictated by force and deceit. He did not change his goals, he merely changed his tactics, transforming each new role into a stepping stone to even greater power and impunity. Vanka Kain's transition into the detective bureau was not just a cynical deal, but the result of a complex interplay of interests, with influential patrons pulling strings behind the scenes. His phenomenal career within law enforcement was only possible because he proved to be an extremely useful tool for those who were themselves deeply mired in corruption and power struggles. These secret benefactors, often high-ranking officials, saw in Kain not a repentant criminal, but a versatile instrument. He could eliminate undesirable rivals in the criminal underworld, blackmail and frame individuals dangerous to their own schemes, and even, if necessary, carry out dirty work that official detectives couldn't or wouldn't undertake. Vanka Kain became their shadow enforcer, guaranteeing their unofficial control over Moscow's underworld, and, most importantly, a source of constant, albeit unofficial, income. He was a cog in their grand machine of enrichment and influence, and they were his shield, protecting his excesses from the rare attempts at genuine justice. This system of mutual benefit worked like clockwork. Kain, possessing unprecedented access to information about the criminal world and, simultaneously, to state resources, skillfully played both sides. He turned in petty thieves and undesirable criminals, creating the illusion of an active fight against crime, thereby earning himself a reputation as an effective agent. However, the true major crimes, often committed by himself or his closest associates, remained unsolved, and their spoils were divided between Kain and his influential patrons. He received a share of the stolen goods, and they gained not only money, but also valuable intelligence, as well as the ability to manipulate the criminal world for their own ends. Kain became living proof that in mid-18th century Russia, law was merely a suggestion, and real power belonged to those who knew how to circumvent it and use it to their advantage. But even in this world of absolute corruption and impunity, there were figures capable of disrupting the fragile balance. The main antagonist, whose shadow gradually began to loom over Vanka Kain, was Stepan Ivanovich Sheshkovsky, a man whose name would later send shivers down the spines of dozens of state criminals and conspirators. Sheshkovsky was not just an official of the Detective Bureau, he was a phenomenon of his time, the embodiment of a ruthless state machine, untainted by personal gain, but driven solely by one goal: absolute loyalty to the throne and the restoration of order at any cost. His methods were brutal but effective. He took no bribes, entered no conspiracies, and recognized no authority other than the will of the monarch. Sheshkovsky's appointment to a position involving the investigation of particularly important cases heralded radical changes. He came into the system to purge it, and his keen eye could not miss Vanka Kain's flagrant abuses. Unlike most of his colleagues, Sheshkovsky had no intention of turning a blind eye to crimes committed under the guise of public service. He saw Kain not as a useful agent, but as a brazen tumor on the body of the state that needed to be ruthlessly excised. His appearance marked the beginning of a new, deadly game in which Kain had no chance of victory. Sheshkovsky didn't play by the rules of corruption. He set his own, far stricter ones, breaking established schemes and leaving no room for compromise. Vanka Kain, accustomed to the system's leniency and venality, was confronted by a force that operated on entirely different principles, threatening his entire meticulously constructed empire of lies and deception. Sheshkovsky wasted no time. His first strike was not against Kain himself, but against the meticulously constructed shadow empire he had built. Methodically, step by step, he began to identify and isolate key informants, those very experts and bribed officials who formed the bedrock of Vanka Kain's invulnerability. Sheshkovsky did not use the common methods of Moscow at that time, threats and bribes. He acted with surgical precision, gathering irrefutable evidence of their involvement in criminal schemes, and then, under threat of severe punishment, compelled them to testify against their main patron. The network, which Kain considered unbreakable, began to crack. Some of his associates, faced with the unprecedented integrity and ruthlessness of the new investigator, chose to betray their leader rather than share his fate. It was at this moment that Vanka Kain made his crucial, fatal mistake. Accustomed to the venality and cowardice of officials, he underestimated the magnitude of the threat emanating from Sheshkovsky. Perhaps he tried to use his old tricks, bribery, blackmail, spreading compromising information, but all of it shattered against the steely will of a man for whom no price existed beyond the interests of the throne. Vanka Kain, accustomed to being the predator, suddenly found himself in the role of hunted prey. His audacity, which had once been his shield, now became a target. He continued his cynical operations, believing that his position as a secret agent was still untouchable, but every step he took only tightened the noose around his neck. The climax arrived in the spring of 1749. Sheshkovsky, having gathered exhaustive evidence not only of Kain's abuses of power while in service, but also of his ongoing criminal activities, ordered his arrest. The apprehension of Vanka Kain, a man who had recently been feared and admired, became a public act of dethronement. This was not merely the arrest of a single criminal, it was a demonstration that the era of impunity, even for those in uniform, had come to an end. He was seized suddenly, giving him no chance to resist, disappear, or leverage his connections. Vanka Kain, always keeping escape routes in mind, found himself in a trap with no escape. The exposure was merciless. Vanka Kain, who had so masterfully juggled roles and masks, was forced to appear before the court in his true, unvarnished essence. His interrogations under Sheshkovsky's direction were legendary for their brutality and effectiveness. The investigator did not seek confessions for petty thefts. He extracted from Kain information about his patrons, corrupt schemes, and the extensive criminal network that had terrorized Moscow for years. Every word, every name spoken under torture not only shattered the myth of Vanka Kain, but also exposed deep wounds within the very structure of state governance. His downfall became a precedent, demonstrating that even the most influential and elusive figures could be toppled if a man who recognized no rules of the game stood in their way. Every word Sheshkovsky extracted from Vanka Kain came crashing down on the heads of his patrons like a hammer. The interrogations, filled with inhuman pain, did not merely uncover individual crimes. They exposed the full extent of the decay within Moscow's state apparatus. Kain's detailed testimonies, corroborated by discovered evidence and the statements of other arrested individuals, led to an unprecedented wave of arrests. Behind bars were not only minor accomplices, but also dozens of high-ranking officials from the Detective Bureau, police, and even the Chancellery, who had for years covered up Kain's criminal empire or directly participated in his schemes. The empire, shaken by palace coups and internal instability, could not ignore such a blow to its reputation. Empress Elizabeth Petrovna, seeking to demonstrate the firmness of her rule and strengthen the crown's wavering authority, personally sanctioned the most severe measures. Kain's arrested accomplices and patrons were subjected to intense interrogations, and their property was confiscated and seized by the treasury. From the single case of Kain and his associates, the state treasury was replenished by sums colossal for that era, amounting to tens of thousands of rubles, money obtained from the confiscation of loot and the assets of corrupt officials. This was not only a financial injection, but also a powerful political signal. From then on, no one, not even the most influential, could feel safe. Vanka Kain's case became a landmark trial. He himself was sentenced to the harshest punishment after a public execution involving flogging with a knout and branding. He was exiled to eternal hard labor in Rogervik for the construction of the Baltic port. His closest associates shared a similar fate. Many were executed, others exiled. The criminal network that had terrorized Moscow for years was virtually decapitated and its remnants scattered. For a time, this indeed led to a decrease in crime in the capital, as Sheshkovsky not only eliminated specific criminals, but also undermined the very infrastructure of corruption that had sustained them. The blow was dealt to those who considered themselves above the law, and this changed the rules of the game for many. But even after his downfall, the story of Vanka Kain refused to die, transforming from a harsh reality into something far more enduring, a myth. The official narrative, proclaiming the triumph of law over crime, quickly faded against the backdrop of popular legend, which rewrote the ending and distorted the image of the protagonist. Vanka Kain, sent to eternal hard labor, became in the collective consciousness not just a punished bandit, but a symbol of audacious resistance, a figure who dared to defy a rotten system and, for a time, even outwit it. This phenomenon, the transformation of a notorious predator into a folk hero, reveals not so much the personality of Kain himself as the deepest aspirations and frustrations of the society that created him. The paradox of his legacy is evident and unsettling. A man whose life was the embodiment of cynicism, greed, and ruthlessness suddenly acquired the traits of a noble bandit. He did not fight for justice. He fought for his own survival and enrichment. He did not help the poor. He merely exploited their fear and need. However, in the memory of generations, these inconvenient facts were supplanted by a far more appealing legend. Why? Because the myth of Vanka Kain gave the disenfranchised what they desperately lacked in real life, a sense of vengeance, the hope that even the most insignificant could rise up and shake the foundations of an unjust world. He became the embodiment of a dream of retribution, of a force capable of breaking through the shackles of serfdom and corruption. A society deprived of legal protection and basic dignity created a hero who, though a criminal, operated by his own rules, not those imposed by others. The story of Vanka Kain is not just a criminal chronicle, it is an anatomy of a society where moral compasses were utterly blurred. It vividly demonstrates how, under conditions of total corruption and lawlessness, when state institutions themselves become hotbeds of crime, the line between good and evil blurs beyond recognition. Kain was not an anomaly, but a product of his era, its very quintessence. His ability to mimic, to transform from a thief into a detective, from a victim into an executioner, this is a direct reflection of the chaos and double standards prevalent in the Russian Empire in the mid-18th century. He didn't invent the rules of this game, he merely masterfully exploited those that already existed. The universal lesson of this story goes far deeper than a mere cautionary tale about a criminal's fate. It warns of what happens when a system loses its legitimacy, when law becomes an empty formality, and power serves merely as a tool for personal enrichment. Under such conditions, not only do figures like Vanka Kain emerge, but also the very need for them, for those capable, even through criminal means, of restoring a sense of control, or at least the illusion of justice. This is a narrative about the fragility of social order, how easily institutions can degrade, and how deeply individuals can fall in their struggle to survive in a world that is itself a trap. The Kain phenomenon serves as a reminder that true strength lies not in suppression, but in justice. The absence of justice inevitably breeds monsters who, like Vanka, begin to dictate their own rules, even from behind bars, through the lens of popular memory. His name, etched not only on shackles but also in the consciousness of generations, stands as a grim yet enduring testament to the peril of an era where there is no room for true heroes, and their place is usurped by those who are merely skilled at wearing masks.